Good evening. Thank you so much for being here tonight. It's truly a privilege and an honor to have the opportunity to speak before you here tonight. And I thank you for your attendance, and I hope the things I say here is encouraging and edifying to you. And I didn't realize that I got counted absent 2 weeks ago because of the snow. You only had 7 people here, but yet I'm still accounted for. I don't get it. But it's great to be here with you tonight, 2 weeks later, and I hope that it'll be encouraging to you. But before I get started, I want you to add Tracy to your prayer list as well, because there's a possibility she might be on the knee injury club, and she's going to go see a doctor tomorrow, and she's going for a second opinion because there has been talk about having knee replacement. And in my opinion, which, it's not medical or anything, I think she's kind of young to have a knee replacement at her age, but that's where the situation we're at right now. And I just ask you that when we hear the talk and the discussion tomorrow, it's good and it's something that's not necessary. But like Jack Reacher says, hope for the best and expect the worst. So I just ask you, though, to not only remember her in your prayers, but also add her onto your list of sisters that have knee surgery. So, That's has been something that's been concerned for us for quite some time. So tonight, I want to talk about comparisons. Now, Tracy does not like this picture up here because she thinks she doesn't look very good. But this was back in 2009 when we had this picture taken. And, in all fairness, some guy tried to pick her up after we had this banquet for teenagers at church. So, but the thing is, back in 2009 is when I started to take a very serious approach to my evangelism. And when I started to take that approach, I thought I had to be like someone else. And there's a group of these individuals, and some of you may know that guy in the middle, and I thought when I wanted to become a preacher, I had to be like that guy. And because he was the one that baptized me, he was the one that did my wedding, he was the one that was always an instrumental part of my life, and I thought in order to be effective, I had to be like him. And I remember one of my first sermons, it was one of his sermons. And I even listened to the recordings and listened to the things about work, and I remember when I presented that lesson, it was not very good at all. And the reason being is because I was trying to be somebody I wasn't. And the thing is, I really need to be me. And I would encourage any evangelist that when we go out there, we don't try to be like someone else. We try to be like ourselves, because people will listen to you because you're showing your sincerity. And sad thing is that many times we do comparisons, and it's not very fair when we do these comparisons. I mean, think about our politics. We say to ourselves, who was the best president in the United States? We'd probably go across this audience, we'd say there was a lot of different individuals. We would probably say to ourselves, who was the best basketball player ever to play? And maybe we'd have a lot of different opinions too. And we even do it in our food. When it comes to Coke or Pepsi, original recipe or extra crispy. And even the Pharisees, we can find in the scriptures, asks us, what is the greatest commandment? And we do the comparisons from time to time, and we need to be careful when we try to do these comparisons, because it brings some difficulties and issues along with it. And you see that when it came to Cain and Abel, it led to murder. You see Rachel and Leah led to bitterness towards one another. You see Joseph and his brothers holding on to dark family secrets for quite some time. And today we need to ask ourselves, is there problems that can come along with trying to do comparisons? And ask if this is something that we should name ourselves amongst us. And one of the things I want us to be mindful of is to be careful when we do this kind of comparison. Look there in Romans chapter 12, starting at verse 6. And you see it tells us, having gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, let us use them. If prophecy in proportion to our faith, if service in our serving, the one who teaches in his teaching, the one who exhorts in exhortation, the one who contributes in generosity, the one who leads with zeal, the one who does acts of mercy with cheerfulness. And you see that everybody has really an important part. And sometimes we say to ourselves, one should be more important than the other. And that should not be the case. Ask ourselves when it comes to our worship, what is the most important part of worship? Do we say to ourselves in our evangelism? Do we say to ourselves in our singing or prayer? Do we say to ourselves in our giving? Or maybe it's just you. Well, why can't it not be all the above? I think sometimes we ask ourselves that one has to be more important than the other. And Romans is trying to remind us here in chapter 12 how important it is to have it all. It's not one was more important than the other. We need to have all these things. We need exhortation. We need teaching. We need one that contributes. We need one who leads. We need who wants to do acts of mercy. We need all these things, and it's all so important. And if we think too highly of ourselves, maybe we say to ourselves that we try to do so much, and then we end up failing when we try to do so many things. Or maybe we don't do very much at all, and we will never do as much as we can because we don't think that we can make very much contribution. You know, one of the things I want to put up here is something called a Levant. And I don't know if I talked about this recently, but of course I've been telling you I've been studying in the Old Testament and the major prophets. And one of the things I find interesting about the Levant is this is that real battle that they had during the times of Jeremiah and of Isaiah and of Ezekiel. And the thing is that the battle was not won with swords and shields, it was won with culture. And if you can understand why the Roman government or the Romans was able to overtake the Babylonians so easily, it wasn't because they were the stronger individuals. As a matter of fact, we probably remember how little of the armies of the Romans was able to take over the vast numbers of the Babylonians. But the thing about the Levant was, the idea was if you had the culture, you won the territory. And if you understand that idea, because you see as far as Egypt, and as far through as Babylon, and as far down as Iraq, or modern day Iraq, you see that the culture was overtaking the whole country. And that's why you see this plead with Jeremiah, and you see this plead with Isaiah, and you see this plead with Ezekiel, to get away from this idea that culture runs everything. God is the one that's in control, not the culture. And they were submitting themselves to this culture. Think about how today some people feel that they can't be a part of the church because they have to look like everybody else. They have to dress immodest because they feel like they'll be out of place if they can't look cool with the rest of the group. If they can't do sports, they must be unpopular because they don't do some of the things that the rest of the culture does. And it's not a problem that was back then, it's a problem that's very obvious now. And brethren, I hope we understand that just because we see this problem here does not mean that we should let culture trump us. Look there in Galatians chapter 6, for example. In Galatians chapter 6, starting in verse 3, it tells us, because if anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. He says, but let each one of us, or at least each one, test his own work. And then his reason to boast will be in himself alone and not in his neighbor. He says, for each will have to bear his own load. Let the one who is taught the word share all good things with the one who teaches. And what he is trying to say here is there's nothing wrong with you being you. You know, I don't know if you girls, they got me candy bracelets from one of the shows from Parks and Rec, and I love that show, but I don't know if you guys watched The Paper lately. There's an episode there where the guy talks about being a news reporter. He says, I didn't want to be Superman, I wanted to be Clark Kent. And he had this desire to be this individual. And we would say to ourselves, that's kind of dumb. Why don't you want to be Superman? He's the strongest man in the world. He leaps tall buildings in a single bound. We can go on and on with all the great things that Superman could do. But he has this desire just to be this ordinary guy. And my point is this, brethren. Why is it that there's a problem with being ordinary? What's wrong with being plain? What's wrong with being just the average guy? We've had this kind of pumped into us that in order for you to make an impact, you have to be extraordinary. But the thing is, if you ever look at the apostles, were they extraordinary men? They were able to do extraordinary things, but they were average individuals. When you look at the apostle Paul, and you look what he was able to do, was he really an extraordinary man? Was Jesus, and we see people even question Jesus when he comes and he's supposed to be this Messiah, and they said, he's too ordinary to be the next Messiah, to be the Messiah. But he was. Just because where he's from and what he did does not make him something that's just subpar. We look at it in a culture that's subpar. We are something great. Remember what Solomon says. Solomon has done everything, known everything, and is capable of doing a lot of things. And he makes a conclusion of the whole matter. It was all in vain. There's nothing wrong with being average. Even the richest people in the world show signs of discontent. Even the most successful people in the profession have evidences of misery. And even the most sexiest man alive in the world today has had multiple marriages. Don't let us look at these extraordinary things and say that's something we want to achieve if it doesn't get us to the kingdom of heaven. Think about this in Philippians chapter 4. And we've used this for a couple of examples. Paul says there in verse 10, I don't got it up there, but Paul says in verse 10, he goes, I rejoice greatly that you are concerned for me. It wasn't what kind of a situation he was in. He was happy because in his situation, he learned to be happy. It wasn't because Christ wasn't there. Christ was there with him. He had this. And he says, I've learned that speaking of being in need, I've learned what situation I am in to be content. I know how to be brought low. I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. He says, I could do all things through him who strengthens me. I have Christ. And because I have Christ, I can do anything. You know, some people, I don't think, realize what they have that's very evident in front of them. If you have a family that loves you and cares for you, is that not enough? If you have a spouse, if you have a husband and wife that thinks that you're all that, and I do, isn't that enough? If you have a job that pays the bills, it may not get you the luxury sports car, but it pays the bills. Is that not enough? Bro, take it from a guy who has always looked for the bigger, better job when I was in the working profession. It did not always lead to better things. Sometimes we think that the next job is better. It may not be. I saw this one story on TikTok or Instagram about this one individual that was at the gym, and he was a teenage man. It's not him, but there was a young man that was there working out at the gym, and right next to him, this girl was helping him out. A teenage girl was helping him out. And he started to do incline bench press of 70-pound dumbbells. That's impressive. At least in my opinion it is. But this goes along with the story. She's impressed too. And she tells him this. She goes, that is really impressive that you're able to do this. He's like, no, it's not. She goes, to me it is. And she says, remember that old saying, comparison is a thief of joy. I tried to figure out who said that, and from what I gathered on the internet, Teddy Roosevelt said this. And she said, he goes, this is a thief of joy. He says, you compare yourself to others, you will never be happy. Who cares what you lift? He says, well, who cares what other people think? Brother, let's never forget and what the psalmist tells us in Psalms 139. It tells us that you are beautifully and fearfully and wonderfully made. And the psalmist realized this, that he realizes how great the Creator has made him. No, he probably doesn't have a V-shaped figure. No, he probably doesn't have all the hairs on his head. He may not have all the teeth in his mouth either. But he is beautifully and wonderfully made. Maybe you don't have the hourglass figure, ladies, and maybe you think that you're too short or you're too tall or you're too thin or you're too heavy. But brethren, let me tell you, get out of this mindset of what society will tell you what's great, and look how God looks at you as wonderful and beautiful and wonderfully made. Finally, if you go to John chapter 21, once again, we go to all these comparisons of who does this and who does that. And one of the things I think we get caught ourselves up a lot is while we do our work in the church, we think that we need to pay attention if anybody else is doing something too. Sometimes we take so much energy and effort to wonder what other people are doing that we don't focus on ourselves. And I always think back to when we look at John chapter 21, Jesus is already resurrected, and Jesus is with his apostles and his disciples, and he's with this one that loves him, or that he loved the Lord, and we know it's John. And Peter asks about John, and he asks about what's going to happen to him. And he tells him, he goes, Lord, what about this man? And Jesus says to him, he says, if it is my will that he remain till I come, what is that to you? You follow me. Brethren, we have been told often that we need to sow the seed. And for some reason, we get this wrapped up idea that we not only want to sow the seed, but we should also water it and give the increase. But Paul even reminds us that we may not be the one that gives the increase. We may not be the one that waters. We may not be the one that plants, but we do have a part. And the thing is that Jesus is trying to remind us that if he makes it, what is that to you? Because you really need to focus on what's going on in your life right now. I had a guy that I worked with at Lowe's that got in he got in a traffic violation. He ran a stop sign. He got in trouble for it. And, nobody didn't really give much attention to him, and nobody didn't give him any drama about it either. Well, a couple weeks later, another guy got in trouble. And for some reason, he thought that it was within himself to tell him, hey, you shouldn't be doing stupid stuff like that. And I kind of got a little bit aggravated, and I said, what, like what you did a couple weeks ago when you ran a traffic sign? And I replied back. I didn't want to try to make it feel like he's low here. I said, listen, we all make mistakes. Don't be this individual that tries to bring other people down so you can lift yourself up. Let's be individuals that strive to work together here. And Jesus is trying to tell him, Peter, you've went through some things. And he says, the thing that you need to focus on right now is you. And sometimes we forget about focusing on ourselves. If you go back to Matthew chapter 15, you see that Jesus reminds us that there is things that has been planted that he didn't plant, and now will be rooted up. He says, you need to focus on doing the right things here. And if he makes it, what is that to you? I want you to follow me. And he says, so the saying spread abroad among the other brothers that this disciple was not to die. Yet Jesus did not say to him that he was not to die. He says, it is my will that he remain till I come. What is that to you? Brethren, don't sit there and say, well, I'm more faithful than this guy. That's not our job, and that's not the things that we should be doing. We should not be in this comparison game and say, rank from 1 to 100, what is going to be the best Christian here at Wellsburg? And who's the worst? It's neat in music, and it's neat in television shows, but it should not be named once amongst our brethren. And so many times we get in this kind of comparison thing that it does some everlasting damaging consequences. This comes to my last story. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, that is Jar Jar Binks. I came to find this out through the internet that this individual has had a pretty interesting life. And his name is Ahmed Best. And Ahmed Best was an individual that had the opportunity to be in Star Wars. Now, if you're a geek like me, you think that's a pretty big deal. But when he was doing a production, this lady from the company that did Lucasfilms notices him. She goes, hey, how would you like to be in this next movie? And not only be in the next movie, but be in the next 3 movies in Star Wars. He was excited. He was ecstatic. He was a big fan. And he was not only to have the opportunity to be in this movie, but he was able to create Jar Jar Binks. And you would think this guy that had this opportunity to do these great things, you'd think he'd be excited and ecstatic about it. But he was until the movie came out. And some of us probably know in pop culture, he's not very popular. And it didn't get to just where he was not very popular. At this time when social media wasn't really that strong, it got ugly. It got ugly to a point where they started making websites to make fun of him. They found his information, his phone number and his address, and they send calls and letters to his house and said some of the most horrible, despicable stuff to this guy. And everywhere he goes, he is looked at as one of the individuals that ruined Star Wars. So what he does next is he decides he's going to the Brooklyn Bridge. He's going to jump off. But for some reason, he doesn't. He's on the bridge. He's over the rail. And he's ready to take that next step to go into the water. But for some reason, he stops. And he gets back over and he goes home. 20 years pass. And now he's got a child. And one day they go out for a walk and they cross that bridge where he decides to jump. And he goes on social media. And he talks about how at one point in his life he was ready to kill himself. This goes all over the internet. And not only is he shown compassion, he's also becomes a little bit more popular. If you watch The Mandalorian, he's one of the Jedis in it. He gets to be on TV shows. He gets recognized for some voice acting. He does just a variety of things. And on top of this, he has a wonderful family. Imagine, brethren, if he takes that step. Because we sit there and we focus on what the world tells you and I. And brethren, let's take it out of the worldly perspective here. Let's take it on a spiritual perspective. Because, brethren, sometimes our worst critics are our own brethren. We ask ourselves, why even bother? But, brethren, I hope we understand that there are some great things that is in store for you and I if we just wait and see. And one of the great things about Habakkuk is when he wants God to answer him, he doesn't expect a response now. He waits. And he's willing to wait for what God tells him next. And God tells him, wait and see. There may be someone here tonight that is struggling with their faith. May I ask you here today, what can we do to help increase your faith? What can we do to help you get closer to God? We have moments like this, and it's a very short sermon tonight. So we can't say to ourselves, what's there better to do? We have a moment to come together, and maybe we need to take that next step in baptism. It's available for us here tonight. Maybe we need to take that next step in repentance. It's available for you here tonight. Maybe we need to take that next step and pray about something. We're going to get on this kick starting the first of the year. Do we need to improve ourselves? And we'll say to ourselves, we'll do better in our jobs. We'll do better in our health. We'll do better in our fitness. We'll do better at home. We'll do better with our relationships. We'll do better with these things. But may I encourage you here, if you need to take that next step when it comes to your spiritual well-being, why wait till the January 1, 2026? Why can it not be tonight? So if you need to respond to these things, may I encourage you to do so now, while we stand, while we sing.